It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Rob, and this is my State of the Dungeon address. This is the State of the Dungeon address for the game of The Princess Bride that took place on the 27th of May, 2021. In this game, unfortunately, not all players were in attendance. The player of Arnaud, the rogue, was not with us, and the game was somewhat delayed because two other members were not able to make it on time, so it was a little condensed. That's not to say a lot of things didn't happen, however. Horrible things. You see, you may have heard me say once or twice on this channel that dice are just random number generators. They make a random decision for you. They determine something randomly. I don't think I can say that anymore, because I was witness to the worst dice rolling streak around a whole table that night. It was a thing of wonder. Now, because it's the Princess Bride, this didn't mean that all players were wiped out to a person. Two things stop that. Number one, the game really isn't that way. It's meant to tell an interesting story using the characters, not turn them into fertilizer. It's not interested in gritty simulation of hand-to-hand combat. It's interested in making a spectacle and telling a story. Number two, the dice curse affected me just as bad as any of them. Oh, did it ever. And also, we kind of avoided any major combats. There was the opportunity for combat, but the group just wasn't having it. So, when we started up, the group had just met Miracle Max by saving him from a few muggers, two of which lay dead beneath their steel, and the last one who had fled. Miracle Max was, of course, grateful, and especially grateful for them escorting him to the barony that they wish to go to. The one that he's been hired to go and help the Baron's plague-stricken son. So, they are now taking Miracle Max along with, who is pretty good at keeping quiet and not, being a nuisance. That also means that there's not a lot of eyes on him unless people are actually looking for him, so make of that as you will. So the group was again pressing to try to get out of the brush that they were using to skirt around Hartfort, which is in the center of Florin. They were trying to skirt around that to avoid the gaze of the guards, so that even though some of the members are a little suspicious, they could get out unmolested and go to get a boat. Well, as you might predict, that didn't go swimmingly. First of all, the group started to go one way, and they heard a noise up the footpath they were going along, and they saw that the brush had been disturbed. It was a lot of noise. It sounded like a wagon trying to get through the underbrush. Most of the group decided they didn't want to deal with this, so they took off using their best skills at trying to avoid a painful fate lost in the woods. Except for Manfredi. Manfredi, the agent, decided, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to go up and see what's going on. He went up and he found two people who were trying to get a sled drawn by two of the saddest looking horses you've ever seen through this path, obviously trying to avoid the fort as well. They weren't enjoying the trip, let's just say. One of them was a strapping woodsman with an axe who was clearing away as best he could. The other one wore a top hat, vest, clearly wasn't used to a great deal of work. Now, of course, Manfredi was curious about what they were hauling, so he struck up pleasant conversation. He ingratiated himself to them, and the dice didn't like him, but on the same point, he said the right things and offered to help. Even though he did terribly in that help, he did manage to convince them that he was a tremendous help. Through the grace of God alone. And they thanked him, and they offered him part of their cargo, which he discovered were weapons that were being smuggled. Normally, big weapons are not allowed by the peasantry, and really kept just for the army, but they were hauling halberds, large pole weapons. In gratitude, they gave him one. contraband, so maybe he could sell it. It's worth quite a bit. They're finely made Swiss halberds. So he's got that as a reward for his work. Now, the group was trying to get through the brush and through the forest. It's amazing they didn't die, quite honestly. First of all, Renoir Lefez, the duelist of the group, decided he knew the right way and got distracted by a bird and almost lugged them into a bunch of quicksand. Fortunately, Josie, who is the wandering farmhand, was on point. She actually managed to make a good enough roll to realize that's not a good idea, and she used her quarterstaff and showed him that there's quicksand all throughout. Not so good. Pete, on the other hand, used his skills to track them back onto the right path, and he actually managed to roll successfully. It was amazing, but he did. Not that his skills weren't good, it's just those dice. Oh, those dice. To refresh, we're playing the Princess Bride, which uses basically the same system Fate does, or Fudge. You roll 4 dice, 2 sides with positives, 2 sides with minuses, and 2 blanks. We were not getting rolls that had any positive. Almost everybody was rolling negative something, and in some cases, disastrously so. 3 or 4 negatives that took a person with good skills and dropped them down into the mire. That was how the night was going, but there were a couple good ones enough that they didn't all get lost in the woods for the rest of the night. So they were finding the right way, and then, the last person to act on this whole enterprise, I've decided to kind of have this team effort thing, where everybody gets to contribute something. When I asked Bonk's player, well, what does Bonk want to add to this? As they were just getting out, he's like, stealth. You wouldn't think the Brute would be very good at stealth. You would be wrong. The Brute is actually great at stealth. He's kind of used to staying out of the way because he's big and attracts attention. He knows how to get around that. It also helps with his circus background. So he tries to lead them stealthily out of the woods. He fails. Now, what was going to happen was a team of guards on horses were coming along and patrolling to keep the scum in line. And, of course, Manfredi pops out and he's like, there are guards. I'm not going to engage them, but I will follow them and see what happens. And they move up, and the guards run afoul of the party. The party does just enough to not get hauled away on suspicion of being brigands, which is hilarious considering they don't exactly look like citizens. Obviously, the Brute stands out, so they knew he wasn't a local, although they might have heard of his circus. They didn't treat him like he was famous. The pirate looks like a pirate. Renoir looks like he walks around swording people. Although he was careful not to draw his sword, he was very polite, and that really went a long way. And Josie is just, she's a girl with a stick. She didn't look like she was a brigand at any rate. She's not wearing armor. So the guards took what they said at face value and let them go, because they'd been pulling bandits off the roads for, they were more looking for people who are in danger of holding people up, and this group didn't look like they were doing that. So the group reunited, Manfredi materializing out of the further on along the path, and they set off again. Now at this point, they were moving along a road that was paralleling the coast, and I asked them, if you continue taking the road, you'll eventually hit the ford. It crosses between the narrow neck that separates the upper and lower rivers. If you continue going there, you're almost certain to find boats big enough to handle your party, but there's going to be more eyes on them. If you travel north to the shore of the lake, you're going to find smaller fishing villages. You might be able to find a boat big enough. And the group realized, well, we could just get 2 boats. That works just fine, too. But, there's one person who's pretty good on a boat and one person who is, well, the skill says mediocre, and with the way the dice were going, they probably would have sunk on first try. This is the case. So they decide they are going to go to the shore and take their shot at that. So they go along and they see that after passing through some farm tracks, they eventually get to the lakeside, and they could see all these little dotted family clusters of houses, and there's one town worthy of the name. It actually has an inn, a 2-story affair that can take people in, used for people who are traveling along the rough coast road, and also, in case, family's house burns down, they have someplace to go to. But it looks like they have a nice little brisk business there. Also, there's a nice boat sitting on the dock in front of it. And they're like, ooh, that'll be big enough for all of us. It actually has a below deck, and it's rather large for lake duty, but obviously a civilian pleasure craft, not a military boat, but still one that would require a crew. So, if you're thinking, boats, think a pinnace, something small. This one had 1.5 masts. That's small size. So the group's like, well, we have to get that. So they went in, and realizing whoever is responsible for that is probably in the inn. They have a caucus outside of the inn to decide what's going on. Manfredi's like, let me go in, let me use my skills, I will and at that, One-Eyed Pete decided he just got tired of listening to him and just walked into the place. Followed by Bonk. Bonk wanted to follow him. And Manfredi's like, okay. So, the group goes into this place, and there's a few locals, and the woman behind the bar is a tough, no-nonsense kind of woman. But they see one person who's dressed as a fop. He has a small sword, but he's dressed way outside of the class of the people here. And for the observant, which One-Eyed Pete is observant, he noticed that there is a dark-clothed figure in an alcove, kind of keeping an eye on whoever comes in the door. And he has a pretty good view of the rest of the room, but he's not in the immediate sight of everyone. Bonk doesn't notice this and just goes up to the bar. Eventually, One-Eyed Pete and Bonk go up to the bar, and they look, and behind the bar is row after row after row of bottles of grog. Very low grade. They also see that everybody looks like they're eating what looks like some sort of fish stew, or a fish chowder of sorts. So they decide that they're hungry and they want to get food, so fish stew it is, and a bottle of grog. So, well, the bottle came because she saw Bonk and was like, here, just take this. But One-Eyed Pete got a tankard of grog. So they're drinking, and the rest of the group comes in. Some of them are hungry, and they order food, and I believe Renoir ordered quite a bit of food, so people were picking up. He had bread, and he had fish, and there's not a great deal to the fare of this place, so it's pretty mean stuff. Although the fish was very fresh, and it wasn't a bad soup. But when they asked about, well, whose is that boat, they got pointed to the fop. Now, Manfredi comes in, and he looks around, and he notices the shadowy figure. And he walks over and decides to try to strike up a conversation. The man says, not wise to talk to a man who's working, friend. He's like, well, who are you working for? He points to the fop. He's like, I'm his bodyguard. Leave me alone. Okay, fine. So, without conferring with everybody, Manfredi is a man of his own actions. And he goes with his shiny halberd, which is wrapped up in oilskins and everything, too. And he goes to the man and says, he starts chatting him up. He is dressed pretty decently. So, he is able to carry himself well. He has a pleasant way of talking, and he can be very, very persuasive when he wants to be. So, the man is a noble, and he's frustrated at being with all these clay of the earth types of this little sea village. So he's happy to talk to Manfredi. And along the way, they start a gambling game. They play an actual English card game called Whist that I am familiar with, which I first heard about in, what is it? 80 Days Around the World, Around the World in 80 Days. Phineas Fogg. Fantastic classic if you haven't read it, but I recommend doing it. And he plays Whist. And I know of the game, and I learned a little bit about it and everything, so it's a fun one to draw in and make it seem a little exotic and real at the same time. So, they start playing. Now, unfortunately, Manfredi doesn't have gambling skills, but he does have a lot of deception. And in this case, that's enough to get you good at bluffing. So, alright, after he had the rules explained to him, he started to take a lead. Now, at this time, the rest of the group, chaos factor set in. And they decided they wanted to try to help. They know Manfredi is up to an angle. They're not entirely certain what's going on, but they want to help. Everybody does. So Bog comes over and he looks around and he's kind of intimidating and everything. But he doesn't sway the game. He just looks around and feels somewhat uncomfortable. Not exactly helping the game, but certainly amusing herself. Josie went over to play with all the children, because a lot of the fishing folk of the town, their kids stay at the inn, and that's where they're tended to over the day while their parents are out fishing or doing different things. So there's a cluster of like 12 young urchins, and Josie is right there tussling with them and playing with them. Bog eventually comes over to help with the playing, and they just thought he was the greatest. He's like the greatest jungle gym ever. Pete decided he wanted to go and see if there was any other kind of angle. And he noticed that all of the liquor in the place was this grog. It looked gross. Except he looked behind the bar and he saw 2 other bottles. One was a delicate wine bottle. It looked like a good wine. Why the rich guy hadn't asked for it, he didn't know. Maybe he didn't poke in the corners, or he just accepted that the lot of the place was to have garbage liquor. He also knew there was a black jug over there, too. But he thought, I want that. The bartender told him that it would be more money than he had in his pocket. He asked if, by trading that halberd that Manfredi has, would that be enough? And she's like, sure. But that's not yours. Oh, he's holding it for me. It's mine. Just turns out that One-Eyed Pete is really good at lying, too. So he walked over, asked to borrow it, took it over to her, traded it for the bottle of wine. So he takes the bottle of wine and goes over, and now he prefers the wine to the noble, whose name, in case anybody wants to know, is Lord Emil Fancy Pants. That is his name. Everyone was calling him Fancy Pants and assumed that meant that it was an insult to him or mocking. No, that is his name. He is Lord Fancy Pants. So Lord Fancy Pants was losing and not too happy about it. So the wine started coming in, and they were sharing the bottle of wine. And, you know, I asked the player Manfredi, I'm like, okay, your deception has carried you so far. But you know what? You have pickpocketing skills. You are good at sleight of hand. Would you like to cheat? He's like, can I? Oh, yes. All right, I'm going to try to cheat. So he rolls. Disastrously. Again, a trend. Absolutely horribly. I'm like, yeah, you try grabbing an extra card and nest it in with your other cards, and the whole thing just falls out. To which he used a Grandpa Wait point. Not to save his life, but to save his con. But Grandpa Wait, he's like, but Manfredi is so awesome that he couldn't possibly have slipped so horribly. Surely there was something else. I'm like, okay. Oh, boy. All right, this is what happened. Bonk is standing there kind of looking around, and as he walks away, he hooks his heel on the table leg and causes the table to collapse, sending the cards spilling to the floor before Fancy Pants gets a chance to look at them. Okay, reset. You get your cards back. Stakes are back on, although they don't know that the barmaid now is claiming the halberd, so he doesn't have his stake anymore. And I'm like, okay, are you going to try to cheat this time? Yes. All right, go ahead. Just as bad, if not worse. Terrible result. It's just insane. So it becomes painfully obvious that he tried to cheat. Painfully obvious. Lord Fancy Pants knows what cheating looks like. And he's like, how dare you, sir? Pulls out his swords like, you are a cheat and you have given up on your wager. I will take the weapon you have. And the bartender's like, that's mine. Traded it for that wine you've been drinking. And he was furious. So he tells him that he is going to make sure that everybody knows that he welches on debts, and it's not looking good. So he whirls around and stalks off. At this point, the rest of the group is kind of like, this guy he's a problem. So they move up to kind of try to control the damage, sort of. a bunch of dangerous-looking people suddenly approach Fancy Pants. Now, the bodyguard looks at this and goes, how many daggers is it going to take down that big guy? More than I've got. And those other guys look tough. This isn't good. But he did start dutifully moving over to flank to see what he could do to cover for Fancy Pants, as a bodyguard needs to. And Fancy Pants sees this threat coming, and he decides to turn and run. Josie, however, was there, and she's like, no, he's not running away. She picks his leg out and boom, swipes his legs out from under him, and he goes sprawling onto the floor. Splat! Actually hits his nose, and it starts to bleed.
Before that, a little kid.
Nope. That's coming.
Nope, it was before that. Because that's when he decided
that's when he
he
ran.
was
Okay.
going to walk out.
Right. Okay, so he was walking... Thank you. Stage manager, thank you. So he was going to leave, and one of the little urchins who Josie and Bonk had charmed said, hey, mister, you dropped this. And he holds up one of the cards because Fancy Pants had provided the cards. He had very nice cards. And he's like, where did you get that? It fell out of your sleeve, mister. Aha! He's a cheat, too! Which, they didn't notice that he was a cheat, but he was cheating. And the game is up. Now it's time to run away. So he turns and runs. That's when Josie picks out his leg and drops him. Bonk moves over to fill the doorway. And when Bonk fills the doorway is full. So now he's stuck. The bodyguard, not happy about any of this. Decide, see what can happen here. And moves up to cover his boss and says, hey, let's not do anything hasty now. And to that, Manfredi decides, no, he takes a dagger and throws it at the feet of the bodyguard. Sort of. He tried. It didn't work. Because again, the dice were horrible. He just throws it into the window.
No.
No.
He threw it at the feet. He picked it up.
Oh, yeah. He threw it at the feet. It skidded. It dunk into the floor. The bodyguard picked it up and decided he was going to throw it back to him. And that's when I rolled 4 negatives. He threw it through the window behind him. That's right, thank you. So yes, Manfredi did throw the dagger well. But, yeah. So, everybody was having bad luck of it. So the group was like, we want our pound of flesh here. And the bodyguard, again, quickly sized things up, calculated his priorities, took his dagger and right in the back of Lord Fancy Pants' head, knocking him completely cold. And he's like, wow, I didn't see that giant move past and kick him in the back of the head. Looks like you guys can get out and get his ship. Oh, here's his dagger. That'll show he's giving you permission to take his ship. Just don't hurt us and we're cool. I'm protecting his body. They're all like, hey, you're a professional. You're cool. Let's go before somebody catches on to this. And they run out of the place. And they run to the boat. And they go to the guard and they're like, guard, we're taking the boat. Here, we have permission. The guard's like, okay. And he walks off because that's what he does. So the group gets on board the boat. It's a nice boat. I mean, it's not a graceful ship or anything like the pirate might have a yearning for, but it's probably one of the nicer boats on the lake. So they get everything going and work on chain of command and who's going to do what, and most of them don't know what to do. They don't know their yardarm from their starboard to anything. So, promptly, Renoir tries to help with the anchor. Botches and throws it overboard. Bonk tries to help push the boat out away from the dock. He falls overboard face first. At this point, the way it's going, it looks like they're going to sink the boat at the dock. Is seriously what I'm afraid they're going to do. Just one horrible roll after another. Eventually, somebody rolls well enough, and I believe it was One-Eyed Pete, to just not break things and just to try to get the boat poles and just to push it away from the the dock so they could try to get out and get underway. Bonk did go, and he tried to get the anchor, but he couldn't because, again, rolls. And he ended up grabbing something that was potentially dangerous instead. He pulled up a fish cage, which had a bitey fish in it. The fish tried to bite him. 4 negatives. The fish brained itself on the cage, and that was it. Didn't even get his fingers nibbled. So, the group gets away with the boat. Everything's cool. Yes. So, basically, when Pete takes over, he's like, hey, we got everything in place. Once all this stuff is lashed down, I can control where we're going with the rudder. I can run things from this point. If we have to make any maneuvers or anything, I'll need more people, but you guys can get some rest, look over the boat, whatever. They're all cool. Looting! Of course they go looting. So they go to the captain's cabin, because Fancy Pants has his own cabin on the ship, of course. And they go to it, and of course, it's locked. Fancy Pants didn't give him the key. So, of course, Manfredi is a man of many skills, one of which is breaking and entering. So he immediately goes to the lock. One horrible dice roll later, it takes him about 20 minutes to get through this lock, but eventually he does. It's not that good of a lock that would keep him out indefinitely. Locks, in this case, are more of an attempt to slow you down so you don't have easy access to things. So they manage to get in. He's got a very nice bed with very comfortable mattress and nice sheets. Josie is in heaven. He's got a wardrobe full of clothes. Josie claims that. She is now in heaven because she decks herself out. But she's a peasant gal. She's a farm gal. She doesn't know fashion. So she comes off looking like just no. Terrible fashion sense. But very nice clothing. All the clothing is great. Clashing? Oh, gosh, yes. Nobody's going to believe that she's a noble lady. But Manfredi goes, that could be useful. Can I make out a set of clothes for myself so I look better than I do? Oh, yeah, he certainly could. And he does so quite easily. He makes himself look like a young lordling. Now, there's also a chest in there. Immediately, Bonk's player goes, that's trapped. God bless him. He's learned so much. I'm so proud. And again, there's a lock. Again, Manfredi tries to deal with it. No. Just no. Dice again. So he goes to get Bonk. Bonk goes over, and it's just a little padlock. I mean, to everybody else, it's a padlock that keeps them out. To Bonk, it's a slight challenge. Pulls it right off. All right. They look inside. For one thing, there's a beautiful sword inside. This is chased silver grip, and it's absolutely gorgeous. The scabbard is very ornate. There's a lot of oohs and ahs. I don't think anybody's claimed it, though, honestly.
Manfredi did.
Manfredi did? Okay, fine. There's also a lot of trade goods inside, including some exotic foods, including chocolate. Oh, Josie clamped down on that, too. There's also a coffer full of 200 gold. So Manfredi got that, and he started giving it to people. It's good to have everybody have coin and be happy and have money in their purse and everything. He didn't give coin to everybody, but enough people got some that they should all have been pretty happy. Now, as kind of a meta thing, bear in mind, when I designed this adventure and the challenges, they really were supposed to have Arno, who is going to make getting into all these places quite easy, because Arno's skills are there. Let me be clear, nobody was rolling good. Arno probably would have been doomed as well, quite honestly. But who knows? We missed you very much. But they managed to get in, they managed to loot anything that they were really that interested in. Eventually, Renoir decides there's nothing really to do. One-Eyed Pete has got the ship. He went down to check out the beds and found out there's still 3 crew members left on the ship. They sailed away without checking. There's 2 actual crew and the cabin boy is there. However, Renoir is a very nice guy. He can be very charming when he wants to be. And he sweet-talked them. He's like, hey, guess what? You're on liberty. You help us with the boat. You don't have to worry about Fancy Pants. We're good. They're like, hey, it's like a holiday. Great. They go up, see that everything's fine. Cool. We're going back to bed. Awesome. All right. Oh, but first, they went down and one of them raided the wine and brought the wine back. And they had some wine, gave some to Renoir. Everything was happy. Everything was coming up good for a change. So, at this point, everybody pretty much done everything they wanted to. So it was time to turn in for the night for most of them. Bonk decided he was going to go fishing. He has a fishing skill. He is quite a good fisherman. He dragged up an eel and he dragged up a big, nice, fat fish for breakfast. And the cabin boy scooped them up and took them off because it's often his duty to help in the kitchen. So, awesome. Everything's going well. The next day, however, when the crew comes up, they're like, well, we should help. So they start helping out, and really there's not much for most of the players to do who don't want to actually play as Pirates of the Lake. So one of the crew, however, does go, ship off the starboard! They look, a bigger ship than theirs is moving up to intercept them. And to intercept, not just going straight at them. So, they're flying a black flag! Pirates of the inner lake of... Yeah. Florin does have lake pirates, apparently, and they were coming for them. So, they couldn't outrun them. They didn't have the wind for it, nor did they have the amazing seamanship skills on lakeside. If they had been in the open waters, One-Eyed Pete might have been able to see them clear, but not in these circumstances. It's hard to outrun people on a lake like that. So, they were kind of preparing for whatever they had to do. Eventually, they noticed the heraldry, which is a woman with a cutlass in each hand, with a dress. Not something you often see on a pirate ship. And they realized that that was the ship of Lady Maybelle, one of the most feared lake pirates that Florin had ever known. She was the match for almost anybody else on the lake. Maybe not so much on the seas, but she wasn't on the seas, so she didn't have any great duels with the Dread Pirate Roberts or anybody else of any note, so she ruled the roost. And not that her crew was known as the most bloodthirsty, but they are to be taken seriously. So the group's like, okay, what are we going to do? After talking it over, they're like, wait a minute. What are we at risk for? This isn't our boat. And really, we don't own any of the stuff here, so they can take it. We're fine. We have nothing to lose as long as we play our cards right. Okay. So, they let the ship come up. They let loose the anchor, which is that fish cage that they had. That's their new anchor. There was chuckles to that. And the ship pulls up. It's about 4 feet higher than theirs. It is a bigger ship. And the pirates are all along, and they're hooting and hollering, and they're just like, we give up. We don't want to fight you. You can have the stuff. We're fine with that. And they were met by Wicked Bill. Wicked Bill is a fun character. Wicked Bill is very excited to talk to them, you see. To be fair, he's a little on the flamboyant side, a little eccentric, sure. Wicked, possibly. But he seemed to be pretty good. The group is like, okay. So they start pumping Bill for information. And he's like, well, yeah, those are Gildurians at the neck you're looking for. Their boss wears all black, which had Renoir going, oh, it's the all black person I want to fight. And known to be a great swordsman. Swordswoman. It's a woman, but she's really good. And they kind of are holding the entirety of the neck, which isn't a major part of Florin, but still, it's a trade road along the north coast. They're kind of holding it in a grip of terror as they raid whatever they want, and they're picking away at the barony up there. Well, they're distracted with plague. So, for some reason, possibly smelling profit, Manfredi said, hey, I am a man of quality. I wish to talk to your captain. And they're like, okay, we can come up and you can see Lady Maybelle. The rest of them are like, are you nuts? You're going to die. You can't fight. And she's a powerful pirate. Die's been cast. You're going to go up. Okay. Because, quite honestly, they were curious what, how valuable he was. Piracy can be profitable if you have the right people in your brig. So he goes up onto their boat, and he sees, once he's on top of it, he sees all the different pirates, and they have a pretty good size amount of pirates. However, the pirates don't do a lot of the crewing. They actually have actual sailors on board the ship, too. But he sees Captain Maybelle. It's hard not to. Captain Maybelle is a woman standing about 7 feet tall. Long blonde hair and 2 plaits down her back. And she has a great sword strapped to her back that, well, to most other people, this would be a huge 2-handed sword. To her, it's a decent-sized sword, but definitely something that's good for chopping people in half with. And he is brought before her, and the men say, "Kneel, dog." Inside joke. But Manfredi kneels, and he's like, and he is very respectful, and that's when he hears Lady Maybelle. "Oh, so there you are!" Yes, she has that kind of a voice. I love affected voices. And she talked to him. "Oh, bring the goods onto our ship." And then one of the pirates says, "Milady, they've got a giant on board their ship who's almost as big as you are." She's like, "Really? Bring the sparring clubs. I have to meet him." So now she is going onto their ship to meet Bonk. It's going to be so much fun. But that is where we ended. It was running late. We had a short night. But as I said, it was an eventful night. Not always for the reasons the players might have been hoping for at the time, but it worked out for a hilarious story. And I hope you were entertained by it, because we sure were. We were rolling at various points. It was so hilarious just watching the bad luck just keep rolling and rolling and rolling. Classic. Anyhow, that was my game. So, hopefully you enjoyed this. Next time, the Great Battle. Lady Maybelle versus Bonk. We'll see who is truly the most powerful. Should be a good, and do we finally get across the lake to the neck and deal with these Gilder Raiders? Who knows? We'll see. Meet with us next time, and we'll find out together in the next State of the Dungeon Address. I am Rob. Thank you for joining me, and farewell.